Hi everyone, this is Sarah from the Narrate team. This weekend, Adam starts a new series titled Simple But Demanding by comparing the temple model of being a Christian to the Jesus model. We're given an example from Galatians that the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love, and asked, what does love require of me?
Morning. I think, ironically, maybe the best way to get your brain in the stream is, have you ever invested heavily in something, become OCD with it, like given lots of time and resource to it, and then months or years later loathed the fact that you had done that? You know, like a hobby, and maybe you collected spoons from all the national parks, or something that you gave a ton of time, a ton of resource, a ton of energy, and then arrived at this place where you hated yourself for doing that. Do you know what I mean? You got that in your head yet? I don't know, like something that you collected perhaps, maybe a relationship, though that would be sad, I suppose, or just something that you just were convinced it mattered. The people around you were telling you you were OCD and addicted and being compulsive, and then one day you woke up and you're like, why did I do that? And, you know, this is your baseball card collection, right? Like, Grandpa, I've got all these cards and they're worth thousands of dollars. And what was his line? They're only worth what people will pay you for them, right? And now you're an adult and you realize they're worth nothing. That type of a deal. That emotion, that sense of having given a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of resource to something, and then arriving at this place where you hated yourself for doing that's the why behind this series. And I know I'm not supposed to start negative, but we're going to turn a corner, I promise. Because I think that if we're not careful, and if you're not careful, that's what happens to our relationship with God and the relationship with the local church. That we give lots of time and lots of energy, and we read lots of stuff, and we volunteer lots of hours, and we give lots of money. And if we don't guard our heart against it, we arrive at this place months or years later, and we go, what? Why did I do that? Why did I drag my family through that? Why did I give as much money as I did to that? Why did I give as much time as I did to that? What? And maybe it's not even just a church thing. Maybe for you it's a God thing. And some of you, we're not going to ask you to raise hands, but some of you were there, maybe. And you're afraid to admit to somebody you're there. But there was a season where Jesus and all that he brought into your life was a very exciting thing to you. And now there's this season of like, I'm just not sure. And you've just kind of lost sense of why it mattered and why you're so excited about it. Needless to say, there's lots of us who aren't here that is where they're at. And if we're not careful, we judge and critique and condemn them. But I wonder if more accurately what we've done to do as followers of Jesus is provide compelling vision for why it does matter and why it is a good use of time. Maybe you're someone that if she wasn't insistent upon coming, if he wasn't insisting upon coming, you wouldn't be here. And that hasn't always been the case. And so what I want to delve into in this series, and it's going to take us weeks, and I don't always do this, like be sure to come back next week, be sure to come back next week, but I'm going to do that a lot in this one because we can't possibly get into it all in a single week. But what I want to dive into is what's the win? Like how do you define winning as a Christ follower, as a Narrate community member? We don't have members, owners. As someone who's thinking about Jesus and the Bible and the text and God and the spiritual life, why does it matter? And I think there's also a very personal component to this. And by personal, I don't even just mean me. I think, listen, if you're a guest, we're so excited you're here. And I think this series is going to be especially helpful for you because you're kind of going like, I don't understand. Why is Jesus so unique? What's the big deal? I think this series is going to help with that. But if this is home to you and has been for months or years, I think it's personal because one of the questions that we have to get into is a question that assaulted me on a run one morning this last summer. And summer for me is this time of kind of self-analysis and organizational critique. And turns out like 12 months of the year are that, and I think we all kind of have that in common. But this summer in particular, I was really working through that, and I could take you to this spot on Lawrence where it turns into LeGrand, where I had this question just assault me aside the head. And the question was, Adam, do we just exist to lower the bar? Like, is that what we're about? Is just lowering the bar so that more people can feel good about themselves and think of themselves as Christ followers? And it's a terrifying question. And let me just be clear, the last thing I'm interested in doing is answering critics. People ask me all the time, you must get a lot of criticism. We must get a lot of criticism. And I'm like, well, of course we do. Like Michael Jordan got criticism for his jump shot, and we're not Michael Jordan. So of course we get criticized, but rarely to my face. And I'm not interested here in necessarily dealing with the criticism. I wasn't trying to draw a parallel between us and Michael Jordan either, just trying to say that of course we get criticized. Everything gets criticized. The color white gets criticized. Everything gets criticized. But if I was going to criticize Narrate, that would be the way I'd criticize it. We're just lowering the bar, making it easy. And as I was processing through that, and that was an emotionally vested process for me. You know when you ever like learned something, not understood why you learned it, and then later realized why you learned it, but you forgot it? You know that? Like, it's like geometry, right? Like, why do I need to know if I have two sides to a triangle, how I get the third triangle? And then you buy a house, and you're like, now how do I figure out how far that measurement is? That deal? That's what happened to me as I was processing through this, because I was reminded of some material. And on this series, I am indebted to Andy Stanley, and by indebted, I mean plagiarize, sue my pants off, like not a new idea. I was reminded of this research he had done, and when I heard it, I was fascinated by it, but just because it was interesting. And I even made a note, like, someday we need to plagiarize that stuff. And then I came back to it and was like, I don't understand why I wanted to plagiarize that stuff. It didn't matter. And then I got assaulted by this question, and I went, that's why it matters. And so let me just say now, where we're going the next several weeks is a lot of Andy Stanley and what's not him, Dallas Willard, because I so admire the way he thinks about Jesus and the kingdom. But to go there, what we're going to do, if you like exegetical, like verse by verse, then this is your morning. Because we're going to spend a lot of time in the book of Galatians, probably love this week, hated last week, you'll hate next week, but you'll love this week. But we got to do a little bit of context. So the Apostle Paul, who was one of the most influential followers of Jesus ever, lived in the first century, of course, wrote half the New Testament. There's a couple things that the Apostle Paul seems to have observed that he may have been the first person to make this observation. And if he wasn't the first, he was the loudest. And we all know it's not the person with the first idea first, it's the one that's the loudest. First of all, it seems the Apostle Paul, being this, like the quintessential first century Jew, understood that Jesus came to bring an entirely new model to the planet. That what Jesus was bringing wasn't a blend of the old temple model and this new model, that Jesus was trying to do something brand new. And that this brand new thing was also the other observation that he made, and he wasn't the first to make it, but certainly he was the loudest with it, was that the message of Jesus wasn't just a Jewish message. This wasn't just the next iteration of Judaism, that uniquely, this message was uniquely for everybody. And though we can see God wanting to do that throughout the Bible, he was very loud on this one. That it was for the Gentiles, the goyim would be the word there. But the third thing, and this is where we're going to just hover this morning, and there's a whole book in the New Testament that's written because of this. The third thing he observed was if you try to blend the old and the new, and you go for 50-50, or you settle for 60-40, or even go 70-30 would be okay. Did I get my math right there? Did it all add up to one? If you go for that, his passion was you won't end up with blended. You'll end up with old. That if you try to blend the new covenant with the old covenant, the Jesus model with the temple model, what you'll end up with is not this 50-50 model. You'll just end up with another iteration of the old temple model. And that's what Jesus came to get rid of. And so the context here is the Apostle Paul, who went on these missionary journeys. He would go into these cities. The first century historian Josephus tells us that by the first century, there was a Jewish synagogue in every Roman city. And so the Apostle Paul was the first one to take this observation. This is uniquely for the Gentiles as well. He went into the Mediterranean Rim, Asia Minor, Turkey, Italy, Greece, that region of the world. And on Saturday, he would go to synagogue and he would talk to these Jewish people about Jesus and the message of getting right with God. And then on the other days, he would go into what they would call, and it wasn't a term of derision, it was just the idea, these pagan temples, these other religious ideas, and he would talk about Jesus, and he would go into the markets and talk with these non-Jewish people about Jesus. And the result of which was these ecclesia would form. These communities made up of followers of Jesus, they would form. And then he would leave and he'd go on to the next community. Well, in the first century, the idea of identity theft was as real then as it is today. So you worry about your social security number and your Amazon password and things like that. They worried about letters, that someone would write a letter saying you had written it, send it off to another community. The problem was you had never written it, but you would be received as though you had. Does that make sense? So the tension in the first century, and you see in Paul's writing, that's why he says things like, look at my handwriting, it's so big, why? It's me writing. The tension was that people could write a letter and say it came from an authority, and it didn't. And so what happened to the Apostle Paul is he would leave these communities. Are you still with me? Should we talk about football? Okay. He would leave these communities. This is just context, and then we're going to kind of bear down on the specifics, but if you fall asleep and then after I'm done, then you'll have it. He would leave these cities, and who would fill the void behind him were these people from Jerusalem who had falsified credentials. They were followers of Jesus coming from Jerusalem, and they would say to these people who had surrendered their lives to Jesus, they would say, yeah, Jesus is good news, but the Apostle Paul sent me to tell you he didn't give you the entire message. The rest of the message is you have to become Jewish to be a follower of Jesus. And over and over and over again, you had this dynamic where these people, these Klingons, we have words for them in biology, these suckers, they would come in behind Paul and they would thwart his work. And when he found out about this, he would get so angry. And what we have in the New Testament in the form of the book, we call it the book of Galatians, is actually a letter that he wrote to this region of Galatia, certainly would have been used in a very broad sense. And it was this letter where he addresses this dynamic. Now, the people who were doing this, they were called Judaizers. And what they were doing is they're saying, yeah, I understand. Like, you met Jesus. That's great. So congratulations. Now there's all these things you got to do. There's I think it's 613 commandments in the Old Testament. So let's get to work. And for men, that involves a little surgery. And there was this tension. And Paul got ticked. And he wrote a letter. And his letter, and here's this bottom line, and then we'll kind of get into the specifics. His letter was that if you try to blend it, if you try to do this 50-50 thing, if you try to figure out Jesus model and temple model and how do we make this one kind of beautiful amalgam, then what you're going to do is dilute, denute, and pollute the entire message. That if you try to do this thing, all you're going to do is disembowel everything Jesus taught of its original meaning and value. And he was furious. And I'm just warning you, where we're going this morning is going to be like, what? Like 2,000 years, how did we mess this up? Or you might go, I need a new church. That's what we'll figure out. So Galatians chapter 5. In Galatians 5, Paul starts out, if I can find it. You cheat because you have the screen. So here we go. We're into the heat of this letter that he's written to these people. He's writing it to the Judaizers. He's writing it to the people who are the victims of this wrong teaching. And he starts this way. It is for freedom that Christ has set you free. Now, let's just stop there. Maybe we just say this. If your expression of Christianity doesn't cause you to feel more free, then Paul's going, you're doing it wrong. Like if freedom isn't a byproduct of your following of Jesus, then Paul's going, you're doing it wrong, because that's what this was all about. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. So you see, Paul is drawing a very clear distinction between freedom and slavery. Verse 2, mark my words. I, Paul, tell you that if you let yourselves be circumcised, Christ will be of no value to you. Mom, what's circumcision? You got to ask her that question. I'm not going to ask that question. But here's the deal. What they're saying is, okay, you got to become Jewish. So if you live in this world, the first mark of becoming Jewish, if you were to convert, was this thing called circumcision. Now, Paul's issue was not circumcision. Like, Paul was Jewish. Paul was circumcised. Jesus was Jewish. He was circumcised. Many of you were circumcised. In fact, if you're circumcised, why don't you just kidding. We won't do that. We'll skip that. That's not his issue. It's not circumcision. It's what circumcision represents. And what Paul is going to continue to say throughout this letter is if you get circumcised, then you're stepping back into the old model, back into the old covenant, and you're putting your hope in that. Don't do it. Over and over, he says. Don't do it. Again, I declare to you, every man who lets himself be circumcised, that he is obligated to obey the whole law. Paul's going, see here we go. You can't blend it. Don't think you're going to take a little bit of grace and a little bit of law, a little bit of cross, a little bit of blood, a little bit of forgiveness despite me, and a little bit of forgiveness because of me. Like the moment, maybe you can say it this way. He's saying the moment you go into negotiation mode, the moment you go, hey, God, thanks for the cross. And did you notice I was in church this morning? Hey, God, thanks for the cross. And do you know how much money I gave last year? Hey, God, thank you for the resurrection. And did you see that I read my Bible every day this week? What he's going to say is the moment you do that, it's gone. You've ruined it. You've diluted it. You've polluted it. You've sabotaged the message. You, verse 4, you who are trying to be justified by the law have been alienated from Christ. You've fallen away from grace. I can't just hear the guys going, come on, Paul, like it's just a little circumcision and some shellfish. Like it's not that big a deal. And Paul's going, no. You've completely lost grace. Maybe we could illustrate it this way. Imagine if after the gathering, you went up to one of the staff, say to Sarah, and you're like, hey, Sarah, you've been doing such a good job around here. Thank you so much. Thank you. I wanted to get you a gift card. Please don't do this because then it would sound like I'm being manipulative. I wanted to give you a gift card for $100 to your favorite restaurant. And so you pull out this gift card. And she's like, no, I can't possibly take that. I can't take that. No way. And you know, I want to give you this gift card. And she goes, well, how about I give you $50 for it? And you go, no, I'm not taking $50 for this $100 gift card. Take the gift card. And she's like, okay, how about I give you $25 for the gift card? And you go, okay, I'll take $25 for the gift card. And you do this exchange. Now, at that point, has she just received a gift card? No. It's a discount card at that point, right? That's what Paul's saying. He's saying to these people, God loves you despite yourself. Before you got out of bed in the morning, before you did anything right, the cross is God loves you the way any good parent loves a child times 1,000,000. Don't start negotiating. You ruin the whole deal. I'm watching my wife right now. This new thing is happening to her where she has this passion to help our boys understand because we talk so much about behavior, that behavior has nothing to do with her love for them or Jesus. And it's this incredible thing to watch, which I'm frankly not good at communicating. But that's what Paul's saying here. God loves you despite yourself. The cross is you can't earn it, you don't deserve it, and you have it anyway. And Paul's passion is if you go into negotiation mode, you don't end up with like the real thing and a backup plan. You end up with no thing, nothing whatsoever. Verse 6, for in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision has any value. It's hard for us to comprehend the weight of what he's saying to a first century audience. Maybe the closest equivalent would be to a bunch of evangelical-minded followers of Jesus today, like reading your Bible has no value. Like what he's saying to them is if you're talking about what makes you right with God, circumcision means nothing. It has nothing to do with you. Now you're going, man, this is so radical. We've not even gotten to radical yet. In fact, the next verse, I'm convinced that probably many of you, I know I had forgot that it was even in the Bible. And in fact, where Paul goes next, I think that if I walked up on the stage this morning and said, okay, you guys have been thinking a lot about what it means to be a Christ follower, and here it is, here's what it means. If it wasn't for this verse and the historical context around it, I think the majority of you, and probably rightly so, would go, I'm out. Like Adam's not balanced anymore. This place we've gone too far. Like no way, can't go there. And listen, if you're not a church person, this is such an important verse that's to follow. Because the reason you're not, in fact, what makes church so resistible and unappealing to so many people has everything to do, and this is where we're going several next week, so don't miss next week, has everything to do with the way the church for 2,000 years has struggled to remember and value and live out this next verse. We're constantly putting certain ideologies, certain beliefs, certain behaviors above this verse. This is so radical. Listen to what Paul says to them. He says, the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. Yeah, but Paul, I mean, not the only thing. Like, Paul, do you see the size of my Bible? I mean, this is like 4 font. Do you see how big this thing is? It's not the only thing. It's like the only of like there's 613 commands in the old, and I think it's 1,027 in the new. So it's the only of about 1,640 things that count, right, Paul? Or did you know there's 10 commands? It's one of 10. Paul says the only thing that counts is faith, the cross, and in the way it expresses itself by the way it treats the person standing next to him. they're going, what? No, come on, Paul, there's got to be more structure than that. And the word expressing means working it out. Working it out. Parenthetically means you'll be terrible at it, and with God's help, you'll get better. Working it out, the only thing that counts. See, the old model, the old temple model, it was entirely vertical. The old model was constantly looking up to God and going, God, are we okay? Are we okay? Are we okay? God, did you see I made it to temple this weekend? God, did you see that sacrifice? That was a valuable goat. God, are we okay? Did you see that I read my Bible today? God, are we okay? Are we okay? Are we okay? Are we okay? And the Jesus model says, if you're a Christian, if you embrace the cross, we're okay. We're okay. The Jesus model is, the temple model is entirely preoccupied on what happens between you and God and pacifying and satisfying and appeasing that God. The Jesus model says, we're fine. So stop looking up and start looking out and paying attention to how you're treating the people around you. See, what Paul is saying here is if you've embraced the cross, if you've recognized the blood, if you understand how entirely other God is from you and how pathetic your best attempts are to be right with him, then you understand that you're fine. You and God are fine. So stop doing the religious stuff and start paying attention to the people in your midst. Maybe you could say it this way. If someone's willing to die for you, they're for you. It's done. You're fine. And so start looking out. That what Paul is saying over and over and over again is, you guys, the old model, it was this thing preoccupied with this vertical thing. And what Jesus came was he came to obliterate that, to make you right with God and to forever transform the way you interact interpersonally and the way you give expression to your faith in that way. Told you, this is radical. This is crazy, crazy stuff. Look at verse 7. You were running a good race. Like I came, I interrupted your temple celebrations. I explained that the first lamb didn't have to be offered anymore. And here's where Paul, I think, is somewhat like our culture, sarcastic and funny, because then he uses a pun, and scholars will tell you it's a pun. Who cut in on you to keep you from obeying the truth? Who cut in on you? You can this that circumcision thing again. Right? Like Paul's like, what happened here? Why are you allowing grace to get intervened on? Why are you messing with faith expressing itself through love? Look at verse 9. And here's his deal. Like here's here's that whole deal. A little yeast works through the whole batch of dough. This is Paul's warning, like, you guys, blend, not an option. Won't work. Will never work. Will ruin it. What is yeast? It's this single cell infection that takes over the whole deal. And then this next verse, this is like R-rated. You should have taken your kids to Narrate Church, because listen to Narrate Kids, because listen to what he says in verse 12. As for those agitators, I wish they would go the whole way and emasculate themselves. Like if they're going to start cutting, they should just cut the whole thing off. That's what he's saying. Like it's that Bobbitt gal, remember her? Like just get rid of the thing. And there's this like, Paul, settle down. Why are you so worked up? Well, you ask that question, you quickly realize Paul had a front row seat to the temple model and what goes wrong with it. Paul was the Michael Jordan of the temple model. He was the best of the best of the best. And when Jesus came in and interrupted his notions of what God wanted from him, everything changed. See, what Paul began to understand was the temple model. The do this, don't do that, that lowers the bar, if we're to be fair. Because the temple model, the reality is, in order to get followers to feel good about themselves, you have to make them hypocrites, because you got to somehow tell them that they're okay when they're not. Paul says that Jesus didn't lower the bar. He raised the bar. I mean, the bar was don't murder. Jesus comes along and says, hey, if you've ever gotten mad at somebody, you're guilty of murder. The bar was don't commit adultery. Jesus comes along and goes, don't commit adultery. Well, that's easy. If you've ever looked twice, you've just committed adultery. Jesus comes along. He doesn't lower the bar like the temple model. He raises the bar so high that it can't possibly be met. And then he says, I'll take care of that for you. And let's give expression to this you and me thing by the way you treat those around you. Verse 13, he picks up, you, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free. But do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. Because see, you're probably already a step ahead of me, and there's a sense of like, wait a minute. That the main thing is going to mess up the whole thing. Like, people can't live in these conditions. Like, we need more structure than that. And Paul's going, listen. If you don't understand the main thing, then if you think the main thing is going to mess up the whole thing, then you don't understand the main thing. If you think that kind of freedom to make it about faith expressing itself, if you think that can't happen, then you just don't fully get the cross and the compelling grace of God as it flows through your life into the world. And then he continues, for the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command. And then this is one of those what kind of things from Paul. Because what he does here is he quotes from their very text, love your neighbor as yourself. Now that's a quote from the Torah, the books of Moses. It's from their own text. It's from Leviticus. And see what Paul's saying here is, you guys, you've had this little kernel of truth. It's been there the whole time, that this one thing was supposed to shape and interpret all other things. I've heard some call this the Wizard of Oz principle. Have you ever considered that the Wizard of Oz probably should have been a 12-minute movie? Right, because Dorothy's dog gets stolen, she gets upset about it, a tornado comes along, whisks her away, she wakes up in this other land, her house is on top of the wicked witch, or that other, she was wicked too, right? That she gets her shoes, she puts the shoes on. What's the whole rest of the movie about? Getting back to Kansas. And so there's all these adventures that go on, and she meets the scarecrow and the tin man and the lion, and eventually she arrives in Oz, and the whole while she's getting chased by flying monkeys and all kinds of other crazy things. Eventually she meets Oz, and she says to Oz, what? I want to go back to Kansas. And Oz says, what? You've had what you needed the whole time. Like the whole time, it's the ruby red slippers. Like the whole time you've been searching, you've had it. That's what Paul's saying to them. Like, it should have been a 12-minute movie because the house thing happens, you put on the shoes, you click your heels, you go back home, it's done. Paul's going, you've had this kernel of truth from the very beginning. You could argue that the temple model got off the rails. And if you allow the temple model to interpret the Jesus model will also get off the rails, because the temple model was, God, are we okay? God, are we okay? And the Jesus model is, we're fine. Because of the cross, we're fine. God, are we good? We're good. Stop looking up. See, when you get this right, doesn't it change everything? When you get this right, doesn't it change the way you think about temptation? About sin? Doesn't this change the way you pray? Doesn't it change the why? See, this gets into that, like, ever invested a lot into something and then hated that you did so? Doesn't this change what the win of a Sunday morning is? What the purpose of being a part of a Jesus community really is? When you get this right, doesn't it change the way you treat people? And listen, if you're thinking to yourself, there's not enough structure, then don't miss next week. Because that's what the early church did. The early church went, this is too much. And it's why by the 3rd century, the early church had almost no resemblance to the Jesus model. And it's not a them thing, it's an us thing, because we go, yeah, but certainly there's certain things you have to believe. Yeah, the cross. No, but there's got to be other things. Jesus goes, no. Paul's going, if you try to blend it, I'm telling you, if you try to blend it, because when you get this wrong, people are treated wrong, aren't they? How many have ever been hurt by a church? What is that? It's people putting the rules above the main thing. When you get this wrong, everything goes wrong. And Paul's message, the reason behind the book of Galatians is Paul going, you guys, you have no idea what you're playing with. But if you go there, you have that procedure, you start introducing a few of those laws, and the whole thing 2,000 years later will look almost nothing like the Jesus thing. And here we are. And I am far from perfect, and we are far from perfect. But I think we can very appropriately go, Paul was all too right. That if you were to ask the people that you do life with, what is the Jesus thing? Lots and lots and lots of things are going to be said. Yeah, I heard they did this, and I heard they did that, and I heard you allow people like that. Yeah, what's the Jesus thing? Oh yeah, it's faith expressing itself through love. Listen here, and this is one of the best questions I've ever heard, and I didn't come up with it. I come up with nothing. I'm just a parrot. One of the best questions I ever heard, and I think the way we step into this tension is to ask this question, what does love require of me? In every circumstance, in every temptation, in every interaction, what if you started to ask this question, what does love require of me? Yeah, but it's legal. Oh, it's illegal. No. What does love require of me? Yeah, but it's orthodox. Oh, no. What does love require of me? Well, I don't want to tell him, but somebody needs to tell him, what does love, but it's not right, or it is. What if that was the driving question that molded and shaped and directed your relationship with Jesus? God, I know I'm loved despite myself. What does love require of me? What does love require of me? Can you imagine? Can you imagine how much your life changes if just twice a day you could ask this question? Could you imagine how much every person whose life intersects with yours? Can you imagine the implications of this? Can you imagine how misunderstood you'll be? And the type of labels that are going to get thrust on you? See, I take solace in the fact that Paul, perhaps the most correct follower of Jesus, and by correct I mean theological, and then in the end most correct in terms of the way he lived his life, because he died trying to take the message to Caesar. I take solace in the fact that Paul was considered to be the greatest compromiser. I hate this word, but the biggest liberal among any of the early followers of Jesus. Why? Because he said the win is the way the cross causes me to treat people, and I'm not willing to allow anything else to define what makes someone right with God. Listen, what if this week, what if you could spend some serious time going, okay, God, what does love require of me? And if you're thinking I need more structure, then come back next week and we'll talk about that. I'd like to pray, God, it's not lost on me, Lord, that the ramifications and implications of this historical context could blow the doors off of lots and lots and lots of religiosity. Jesus, our desire is not to lower any bars, but to be faithful. And we are so grateful that you go before us in that endeavor. Amen.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.